All right. Like I mentioned, great to see everyone here. This is the Medplum and Phenomenal FHIR and AI for Life Sciences webinar. And before we get into it, I would like to have Kerry introduce herself, but I will introduce her briefly beforehand. She's a really accomplished person, knows a lot about FHIR, MIT degree, league, life sciences background. So Kerry, please introduce yourself, as I did a poor job, but she's a very awesome person.
Oh, no, that's great. Yeah, nice to see a bunch of you. I know a bunch of folks on the call, so really excited and honored for you to join us today. This is an intersection of topics that I love. As Reshma mentioned, my background's in biological engineering from MIT. I've been in the healthcare industry my whole career, Beckman Coulter, making instruments that sorted cells, built Amgen's AI team from scratch, and that inspires some of the use cases that we're going to talk about today. Built League's FHIR data platform when I was there as their VP data. We mostly served customers that are in retail pharmacies, providers, and payers. And now I'm the co-founder and CEO. We're a healthcare AI developer platform. We partner with Medplum. We love Medplum, and really excited to have this webinar with Reshma.
Thank you, Kerry. And hi, everyone. I'm Reshma, co-founder and CEO of Medplum. Longtime software engineer, have a crossover background, but was at Microsoft early on the Meta team over a decade ago, and have crossed over into healthcare IT. Medplum, we are a community and a company. We make a lot of FHIR tooling and are open source. In fact, I'll briefly plug our repo if Finn, you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat so people can start it. But that is what we do. And we are really into open source. And maybe before we go into kind of the demos today, for which we have a lot, wanted to frame it up a little bit. So what is important to understand about FHIR and AI right now? And why is it useful for life sciences? What does it enable you to do? We're going to go through showing, not telling, with source code, resources, and demos, things that you can do. And we'll have a little bit of discussion on, there's a lot of thought that my enterprise will never accept these newfangled AI tools. We want to show how that is not the case. Then we'll go into a few demos, including patient support program, real-world analytics use cases, clinical trials search reference implementation, and a patient cohort discovery demo. So that's what's on the agenda today. One thing that's really important to understand is that LLMs understand FHIR really well. And that makes it a very special time in history. When we talk about all these fancy things that machines can do, the machines need to interact with other machines, and FHIR is an important element of that. In fact, AI enables fast development of custom applications. In the past, if you wanted to build this custom app, you'd have to put a lot of time, effort into it. And if you started from scratch, or you could buy pre-shrink wrapped software and just fight with it. But now, due to the advances in technology, a custom application is a lot more accessible. And life sciences, by definition, you're on the frontier of science, of innovation. Shrink wrapped stuff is not going to work. So that is what we're going to show here today. And these examples are open source FHIR infrastructure. They're certified, compliant, self-hostable. We, Medplum team and Phenomenal team, we know the drill, how to ensure that applications meet the IT and security requirements of your organization, and they are meticulously documented and supported by staff and an active open source community. So hopefully that would be a takeaway from today's discussion. But why don't we dive right into it, Kerry? First up on the docket, the patient support program.
Awesome. I am going to be demoing a patient support program voice agent. You're going to be seeing my Medplum application because I'm going to be showing you a patient that's created. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about patient support programs because this is a space that not a lot of folks are familiar with outside of biopharma industry, but it's full of interesting learnings and opportunity. When I was at Amgen, I worked on analyzing our patient support program call center recordings as part of efforts to better understand patient feedback. I have personally listened to hours of call center recordings. In the early days of LLMs, or actually pre-LLMs, we were working with older models where the transcription quality was subpar and the downstream NLP was challenging. It was important to stress test and evaluate those models in terms of how they were transcribing and processing our call center recordings. Call center recordings from biopharmas are an incredible source of information, first of all. Second of all, a really important opportunity to be able to ensure the patients that are on your medication are being supported. If you're on a specialty pharmacy drug like a GLP-1 or a migraine drug or drugs for immunotherapy or oncology, a number of different use cases, particularly where you need to inject them, there's a lot of complicated questions that come up for patients like, am I injecting this correctly? Why do I have this rash? Am I allowed to take this while I get my flu shot? When I was chatting with Reshma about preparing for this webinar, one of the use cases I wanted to feature is what becomes possible with AI and FHIR that we couldn't do before. And one of those use cases is building a voice agent that can conversationally interact with the patient and register information. So the agent that I'm going to demo, I'm going to actually call the agent on the phone, is using Phenomenal's APIs to build an agent. It's interoperable with Medplum's FHIR server. We also support a number of other FHIR servers on the market. And I'm going to show you how you can actually interact with this as a patient. The example is also going to be open source. I have a branch of it, so we'll share the link in the chat later on. This whole session is being recorded, so you'll also be able to take a look after. If I get enough encouragement, I will record a standalone YouTube video of this demo.
You.
So I am actually going to call my voice agent on the phone, so you're going to hear me interact with this agent.
I'm here to help you answer any questions about Ozempic.
I'm a new patient, Mary Smith.
It seems like you're already in the system, Mary. Is there anything else I can help you with regarding your health or medications today?
I'm a new patient, Jane Doe.
Okay, Jane Doe. And what is your date of birth?
January 1st, 1980.
Thanks, Jane. I have you in the system. Before we proceed, could you please provide a summary of your health history and current medications?
I'm taking Ozempic.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what medication you mean by those dumpers. Could you please clarify the name of the medication?
I'm taking Ozempic.
Okay, I've recorded that you're taking Ozempic. Do you have any other medications I should add to your record at this time?
No, I just have a question. Could you tell me about the formulation requirements? Do I have to keep my Ozempic in the refrigerator or can I leave it out?
It's important to store your Ozempic pen correctly to ensure it works as expected. Unused pens should always be stored in the refrigerator. In-use pens, once you start...
That's how it works. When you call 1-888-ENBREL, a patient support program person who's typically a nurse will answer those questions, answer any questions you have about your medication, side effects, issues that you're having. And this is something that takes and consumes an enormous amount of resources and costs for many life science organizations. And it's also a rich source of information. The exciting part is we're able to build an agent that can take actions on our server on behalf of our agent in terms of interacting with the patient. So we registered a new patient and we've also created medication requests for them. So I've been obviously demoing this quite a bit today and gives you a sense of the different kinds of patient interactions that you can power. You could do a full patient intake. Another use case could be supporting patients with prior authorizations. Hopefully this gives you a sense of what's possible. All of the customization is done in the prompt. I'll be sharing a link to the agent so you can take a look. This really opens up the ability to drive fine-tuned personalization and customization for your specific use case, because this can differ quite a bit across different life science organizations. Now I'm going to hand it back to Reshma to talk about the provider experience in the context of patient support programs in general.
So cool, Kerry. Now the agents can create, manipulate, store history, and this allows you to create a program that can really robustly support your patients throughout their journey. This is a sample application called Medplum Provider. This is a FHIR native application. So if you see all these like allergies in here and problems and stuff like that, these are just FHIR resources shown in a cool app. This application also has robust support for rich media, so call recordings and stuff like that can be stored. And they're just like media resources in the FHIR server. If you need to handle them or manipulate them, you can support transcription and other use cases to build out this fully fledged program and support your patients as they go through their journey. FHIR native applications plus the FHIR agents that really understand telephony well, very powerful tool to get where you need to go in your patient support program and really have something ready quickly with lower effort than what was previously in the matrix for what you could support. Good. And Finn has chatted out the source code for this application too. This is like Medplum Provider, a sample app. So it looks like there's some questions in the chat. How do you manage consent and access controls? Very good question for the voice agent. Very robust support for access control. So at the FHIR+AI level, you can control the scopes, you can make it read-only, you can mask data fields, and that is your key primitive. I'll show a demo of this later on, how to get that data flow going. And I think that it's a way to enhance the compliance and configuration.
Yeah, and for the demo agent that I linked, that's actually invoking Medplum's FHIR APIs, you can scope it down to whatever access policy has been implemented in terms of Medplum supports really fine-grained scopes. A number of FHIR servers don't support that level of degree of fine-grained controls that you can on Medplum. And with our agents, we can support scopes that are specific based on the different FHIR servers. For Medplum, that can be very specific and controls the type of access that agent is taking on. That's a really important caveat. I also want to point out that when you see these demos of folks building voice agents, a lot of them are giving the agent application level credentials, which is pretty broad scopes. Thank you, Neil, for bringing that up because it actually is a big point where you want to ensure that the agents you're building can support that level of scopes in terms of those actions that they're able to take on.
Scopes, and then everything created has the right provenance, so you could trace back where it came from. Those type of things are key to getting your compliance and everything where you need it to go. All right, in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the real world evidence analytics use case. I'm going to show you a basic example, and then Kerry will show a very advanced example. So this is the MCP demo. Medplum has FHIR at its core, and we also support the MCP protocol to allow LLMs to connect readily. So I'm going to show you a demo of how that works and how it can be used for a real-world evidence use case. So this is Claude from Anthropic. You can connect your Medplum MCP here. Here, I'm going to show you an example of the scopes. So you could construct the request so that it can only connect to certain resources if you want, or set an access policy. And here, my MCP is connected. Okay, let's start with the fun stuff. What are the side effects of Ozempic? We're really Ozempic brain today, Kerry. I think
it's a hot topic. It's basically
topic.
How many buzzwords can you hit? AI, GLP. It's like, this is the trifecta.
Look at all those side effects. So use FHIR search to find patients with these side effects. This is a very naive implementation. What I want to flag here is that this is not going to be perfect, but the models are getting extremely powerful. And you can see, look, Claude is constructing a FHIR search here. It's thinking, it made this FHIR search, it got back a bundle, it's processing it. Look, it's looking for semaglutide, it's found synonyms, it's looking for adverse events. It's navigating all the FHIR resources and constructing what would have taken a lot of tedium before to get everything together. And I think this is a useful framework to understand how these LLMs would be so powerful. Oh, look, it found 2 patients who have nausea. Marge Simpson has both nausea and vomiting. It's reaching into the server and manipulating. Will your LLMs be trained to support codes and codable concept? The answer is yes. We have built-in terminology. Kerry will show some related workflows to get something more high fidelity. It is a good question. The code systems, the synonyms, those are all areas of active development, and the LLMs are improving, but there's also techniques that can be used to mitigate. So this is, again, traversing all of these important elements for me, learning all the ins and outs of the FHIR spec. Here, you can see Alexander Hamilton, Marge Simpson, Diana Ritchie. You can see the summary of what has come out from the LLM, kind of a little bit of a hello world. Kerry is going to show like a more advanced scenario that may be informed by her own experience as well about how to boost the fidelity a little bit more.
Yeah, I mentioned in the chat. So at Phenomenal, we offer a configurable medical RAG as an API. So we support the medical terminology systems that we know and love, SNOMED, ICD, LOINC. We also support human phenotype ontology, RxNorm, and so forth. This is really valuable in terms of being able to construct patient queries and cohorts. Really fun experience that I had when I was at Amgen as well as at League is, who are all the patients that have this but haven't done this? Who are all my patients that are on Medicare Advantage that haven't been seen for a fall risk assessment this year? Who are all my patients that have osteoporosis who don't have alendronate prescribed for them? These are common questions that get asked time and time again, not just in life sciences, but broadly in healthcare. It's actually really hard to identify those patients. The use case that I'm demonstrating here in a Python notebook is to show an example workflow of using language to generate cohort search queries to define a subset of patients that meet a given search criteria described in language. And so in this case, I'm using our Python SDK as an example, but you can also incorporate these APIs into a backend application that you can host so that you can make more of a chat-based widget to be able to converse with your agent. In this example here, I'm searching for patients with ADHD in my FHIR server. The way our Cohort API works is it constructs a series of FHIR searches. So first it identifies the relevant condition codes based on the query you're asking. So in this case, it's breaking it down to search concepts, extracts the relevant codes, inclusive of both SNOMED and ICD terminology systems. Depends on the resource and how you're searching for that. And then now, really common question in biopharma, like, who are my patients that have been diagnosed that are taking a specific drug? And so in this example, I'm doing a subsequent search, patients with ADHD, taking 10 milligrams Adderall XR. This seems like a very simple question. It's actually not, because in the medical coding system for drugs, we have a pretty exhaustive list. It's also dependent on formulation. In practice, it takes like weeks of debating with a bunch of epidemiologists, in my experience, to be able to figure out the right set of codes. And obviously, if you're doing regulatory grade research, it's really important to use existing code systems that are present. But excited to see what's possible. And we're excited by customers using our APIs to power these kinds of use cases. So here it's looking for two sets of searches based on condition codes and then based on RxNorm values, and then does the set intersection of those to get the narrowed down list of patient IDs that matched those two different search criteria. And you can extend this further. So earlier, I gave the example of the patient support program for a patient voice agent, shared that repo link in the chat. When we're done with the webinar, we'll send all the resources to folks that have attended. But I wanted to show how the really powerful thing about being able to do FHIR searches and FHIR resource creation via AI APIs is that you can build customizable workflows and agents. I'm using our agent API to construct prompts. Then I can dynamically create an agent and pass in the prompts that I want to be relevant for that agent. So you could imagine customizing for a specific kind of real world evidence search on a FHIR server, GLP-1s, for example, or maybe you're using it for more of a value-based care use case. This is built so that you can add a fine degree of customization and then use that agent to converse in it. Most conversational AI, you wouldn't be chatting in a Python notebook, but giving you a sense of what's possible. You can also take that agent ID and invoke it in a backend to have a conversational search for patients and conduct this kind of research. This is non-trivial. This is such a pain across healthcare, and a lot of opportunities to really make this easier for folks to better understand. The other thing I'll say is in the life sciences industry, we historically, like when I was at Amgen, only started to learn about FHIR. Somebody came back from HIMSS in 2017 and they were like, there's this thing called FHIR everybody's talking about. That has really changed over the past couple of years. I've chatted with folks from GSK, Takeda, Biogen in the past 2 years or so, and we're starting to see a lot more life sciences organizations getting into FHIR. The reason being, there's a lot of opportunity at the intersection between providers, biopharma, and payers. And so it's a very exciting time for life science organizations, especially as it applies to the FHIR space.
Could not agree more, Kerry. I think Medplum, a lot of our customers are on the provider side or payer side making applications, and FHIR is really a crossroads. Also, the agents understand it too, and the LLMs. So it's very awesome for that use case. I see a question from David Hancock. How easy is it for the agents to work with different profiles? The answer is really easy. So Medplum has a feature. This is like our FHIR server browser tool, where it lets you do the basic CRUD on FHIR resources. But if you load in your profiles as structure definitions, your API enforcement and all your tooling will naturally inherit all of those FHIR profiles. So this is the one for the US core, for example, and it can pick up all the code systems noted in the structure definition. It's very powerful. If you want to, for example, have your agent just respect the profile via advanced prompting, that becomes more accessible. Thanks for this, Kerry. We better move it along here. Patient cohort discovery. Kerry alluded to this in her previous notebook she was showing in the chat. Educate us. What is patient cohort discovery? Say I have a big health record system. What's going on here?
Yeah, so again, this is the follow-up to my brief, passionate discussion of how difficult it is to describe a group of patients based on a natural language summary. I gave the example of real-world evidence where I'm doing an analysis on my data store, what's going on with these patients, essentially, like what are their core demographics, what's happening with them. That was the example I was showing earlier, where you can define that cohort and then do subsequent analyses.
Yep.
But the other thing we have that happens in healthcare, particularly on the provider side, is let's say I'm recruiting for a trial. Who are my patients that meet my inclusion and exclusion criteria? This is also a very hard problem. We have made a fork of the Medplum provider app that incorporates a number of phenomenal AI APIs to power these kinds of AI use cases natively in a provider experience. And so I'm going to do like just a very simple one where I'm going to describe a group of patients. I'm going to say female patients over 20. And what's happening here, I showed you this in the Python notebook example where it's taking language, converting it to a series of FHIR searches. The cool part here is that it generates a FHIR group. And so this becomes powerful because now I can do a lot of really interesting stuff. I can identify that group of patients. I can assign them to a research study for recruitment. Let's say I was looking at a group of patients in the provider space, not as life sciences oriented. They're on an MA plan. They haven't gotten their fall risk assessment this year. I want to identify them as a group and then apply a care plan to them to follow up and make sure we're checking on those patients. This workflow supports that, which is really exciting. And that's the beauty of FHIR. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We have a lot of really smart people working in this space. The idea here is to use language to construct a series of FHIR searches using our Cohort API that generates a group. Then you can do follow-on activities assigned to a group resource, which is pretty exciting. Reshma, should I go straight into the clinical trial use case or?
Oh, did you want to show the cohort builder tool?
Oh,
okay.
yeah, that was fast.
Awesome. Very cool. Doing these complex queries, I think in history was, maybe Finn can attest here, like helping people construct these complex queries and really thresh their data. And this is just so much more elegant. It's very exciting. Very cool. So let's move on to clinical trials search. Maybe let's discuss this one for a minute, Kerry, before we go into it. I think this one is a little bit complicated because there's a lot of weaving here. I think at a high level, you need to have a health record system with some kind of traffic on it, people getting treatments, having care, or other workflows. People should be able to manage their consents and have that element as well. They may or may not be aware of what's available in terms of clinical trials. So maybe, let's talk about the backstory a little bit. What is the elements here that are important and what reference implementations do we see in the wild?
Yeah, so I guess we're looking at this from two ends. One is, given I'm recruiting for a study, who are my patients that meet that study? There are providers recruiting for that study. There's the trial sponsor. There's the biomanufacturer that wants to make sure that they will get people for the study, and patients who desperately want that medication or that intervention to be studied. And so there's a lot of stakeholders here that have a high degree of need, for, are these patients eligible? And there's a number of startups on the market that are definitely tackling this problem. The use case I was showing where we're defining a cohort using language, you can envision being able to describe in language and complete inclusion exclusion criteria for a study, and then to be able to have, using this Cohort API, then have a number of searches that are done to narrow down your set of patients that are a good fit for the study, then assign a task to have a research coordinator contact them directly. These are the types of use cases supported. On the other end, I'm a patient. What trials am I eligible for? This is a non-trivially difficult problem that I don't think a lot of people fully grasp. I personally have a ton of experience in this space, sadly, because when I was at Amgen or having been worked in biopharma, if you're like 1 degree or 2 degrees connected to me and you have unfortunately had a family member that's had to look for trials, I end up getting contacted to help the family member navigate clinicaltrials.gov. I just want to show you quickly what that looks like when you go to look for trials as a patient today. This is the interface, which it seems maybe there's a number of folks that have a software development background on this call. This might seem straightforward to you, but if you are stressed, upset, don't know what's going on, don't even fully understand your condition that you or your family member was diagnosed with, this is a very upsetting experience to go through. And clinicians themselves don't often have the resources to be able to search for these kinds of trials. And so in this use case, we're going to be looking for eligible studies for our patient, Mark Scout. He is a character from the show Severance. I've given him a number of conditions.
Kerry, before you go to the search experience, maybe you could show some of Mark's data in Medplum app. So it's definitely, this is FHIR, and go through the code system.
Oh, yeah. We can look at a bunch of the different information on this patient. We can look at the different conditions that they have, what kinds of diagnoses have been recorded for them, what medications are they taking. I have prescribed him Ativan multiple times. We have given him treatment-resistant depression, and then we can go and look at in detail the actual structure of the FHIR resource to see the specific coding for all of the given medications that this patient has been prescribed.
Yeah, so assuming you have that structured data, that's the basis, right?
So once you have a lot of this information on your patients, and this could be ranging from providers treating patients across a variety of different spaces, there's this rich amount of information present. What conditions are they diagnosed with? What medications do they have? And we could even extend this use case to also look at other observations. These are really important because we're using demographics, conditions, and medications to inform the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the patient for a trial. So while this search interface on ct.gov might not look overwhelming, first of all, if you're upset and stressed because you've been diagnosed with a condition that you need to be looking for trials for, it's going to be a very stressful experience for you. But second of all, once you go and find those trials, the nitty-gritty of the inclusion and exclusion criteria is embedded in the text of the trial. And that's not easy for people to be able to parse through. And clinicians themselves don't have the time to actually go through all those detail in many cases. And so it's often up to the patient or their caregiver to look through those clinical trial resources. This is a use case where we're going to have AI identify relevant trials. It's going to be grabbing the information on the patient, so a summary of the conditions the patient has, the medications the patient has, age, sex, and location, and it's going to find trials that they might be eligible for and optimize for them. This is using a Medplum bot to fire off those requests. I should also mention in the prior example with all of the AI-powered applications that are incorporated into this Medplum provider link to FHIR repo that I shared, they're all using Medplum bots, powerful serverless capability that enables sophisticated event processing on Medplum. So we're going to search for trials for our patient Mark. And the exciting thing here—
this is the context of Mark's own record. So it's not like you're retyping everything.
No, it's pulling directly from there. And then as part of that workflow, once it finds the relevant trials, it's creating a task. This example is completely open source, so you can take a look at the source code in the repo I shared. That patient is being provided to an LLM, which is then querying the clinicaltrials.gov API. See, they've made a lot of strides in the past 10 years. It's identifying a series of searches to find relevant trial IDs that might be a good fit for this patient. It found a trial that could be a good fit. It's in France, so the LLM isn't sure if that's a great idea. And so we're able to click and actually look at the NCTID for that given study. And so let's say if we had multiple, you could also prioritize the different studies that might be a good fit. I just think it's a really exciting time in this space because there's a lot more that we can do to connect the dots between the different stakeholders in healthcare, whether that's life sciences organizations, patients, caregivers, payers, providers. I hope your takeaway here is there's a lot of promise at the intersection of FHIR and AI to really connect the dots, ultimately to improve people's outcomes.
Totally. I think that one workflow you showed would have been hours of a coordinator's time and researchers, and it's only accessible to a smaller group because of the labor intensiveness. And this can really reduce the administrative burden and impact people's lives. So that's super cool. Okay, couple of questions from the audience. How is the PII/PHI handled with the FHIR API? Should data be masked or anonymized before integrating with the LLM? David Michael, that is a good question. So there's a couple of layers to this. One, if you're using a kind of off-the-shelf like LLM, Anthropic and OpenAI will sign BAAs, so there is that. But sometimes that could be an issue as part of the researching diligence process. And so a couple of avenues. One, on the Medplum side, you can connect your Medplum to stateless compliant, for example, Bedrock-like services that would not persist and just be transactionally using the LLM. So that's one avenue. Second, support for access policies where you can mask some of the demographic and stuff like that in order to have a more restricted policy. And I think on the phenomenal side, maybe Kerry, you could speak to it, but there's different retention schemes. That's really the kind of major avenue.
So for us, we sign BAAs with our customers. We're HIPAA compliant. Under the hood, we're using FHIR+AI, GCP's AI platform. I have heard anecdotally folks having a really hard time getting BAAs signed from OpenAI and Anthropic unless you're a covered entity, not a business associate. So often it's easier to get it through the cloud providers. We use FHIR+AI under the hood to power all of our AI-related features. We added a significant amount of conformance checks, validation checks, schema enforcement, RAG. We're really ultimately designed for healthcare usage, and accuracy, configurability, and structure is really important to achieve that. The other thing that I'll say is we're also adding support for private LLM usage. The other approach you can take from a HIPAA perspective is to ensure that your LLM uses a completely private environment. So we're adding support for OLAMA as well in a sort of more of a self-hostable capability. The cool part is that actually works even in an air-gapped environment. If you are working with the DoD, or another sensitive area that requires an air-gapped security posture. The exciting part is that the open source models are getting better and better. And so you can leverage platforms like OLAMA directly. And we also support that as phenomenal.
100%. In us on the Medplum side, we are very familiar with all of these self-hosted scenarios, highly private environments. You can even use your cloud credits or cloud committed spend to use your Medplum solution. So if you're ever interested to talk with us about it, we have calendar, feel free to step on in. I think it is hard to sometimes understand and connect the dots on how to get your compliance framework to be in line with the solution. And we have a lot of experience with that. So happy to chat on that regard. I think it's my expectation that organizations will start to be very aware of where their data is going as it regards to LLMs and having some guarantees about the traceability of the data flow is the requirement. How are hallucinations prevented in the model? Are there additional steps for validating the input and output? You should talk about RAG here, Kerry. I think hallucinations are getting reduced, but there are many advanced techniques to mitigate. Kerry, do you have a thought here?
Yeah, so in terms of all of the APIs that we make available as phenomenal, we solve for this a couple different layers. The first thing I will just say, so my background's in biological engineering. Working with LLMs is so much more similar to working with biological systems than in software. In biological engineering, we control our inputs and validate our outputs. That's how we make sure that when we manufacture cells to produce therapies that treat people, we're doing so reliably, consistently, and safely. And so that's actually the core ethos of how we build our AI APIs at Phenomenal. And specifically how we do that is a couple of different pieces. You think about, how do I ensure that the inputs that I'm providing to the LLM are constrained and specific and already pre-filtered for my given use case? And then at the other end, adding constraints in terms of multiple layers of validation checks. And so at the input stage, we're doing that with our Construe API, which is a configurable medical RAG as an API. LLMs mathematically are not trained to predict random alphanumerics. That's not how next token prediction works. And so you're going to get lucky with a lot of the common conditions just because they've seen enough of these instances of that specific SNOMED code for diabetes, or certainly in the ICD-10 coding system, there's a predictable pattern to them that doesn't exist in a number of the other coding systems. Our customers that are using our APIs get reliable codes that are extracted and utilized in the subsequent either resource constraint construction or request using a RAG-based approach, which does a semantic search on the embeddings for the vector databases for all of the relevant medical terminology systems. And so that's like the solves for the code hallucination piece. And then our other sort of like general philosophy is enforcing constraints in terms of the schema. And then even under the hood, we have a significant amount of structured interfaces within our overall system. Happy to like nerd out on that to an nth degree.
50 million buzzwords in one rant, but great. I think it is an in-depth topic. We see this on the Medplum side as well. We have an advanced terminology, low latency terminology server with synonyms, which is a very useful primitive. If you search and it doesn't match, people are building those into the prompts to help as well. It's on the frontier. Both the models and the tooling are advancing rapidly, and we can expect good things from this scenario as well. From Ozer, for clinical trials use case, you are gathering patient data from the FHIR server. How is the integration handled with the clinical trials? Is there custom AI outside of FHIR? Good question, Ozer. So Medplum, we're talking about life sciences today, but people build fully ONC certified EHRs on top of Medplum. We have all the tooling you need to do sophisticated referrals. 1, generate the CCDA. 2, connect to other providers using direct trust. 3, if you need to do that patient synchronized to the HIE and you're a covered entity, we can help you do that. All of those things are accessible to the tooling if you have the right structure, and absolutely support getting that data flow across the organizational boundary, assuming it complies with your compliance programs. I think those clinical trial sites do like to be contacted. Automations are readily available. One thing that's really useful is if you are a trusted party, like you have a business entity and you are a biopharma or not just a random person, that helps facilitate the handshake with the referral. We're happy to also nerd out about it if there's some specific use case. As we think about getting a great solution for all parties, the crossover nature of FHIR across life sciences, payers, and providers is what makes this really sing. From David, how do you ensure output is explainable, traceable, and repeatable? For a record-keeping system, you do really need to have that traceability and show your reasoning. For the things that we have described here, if you're doing some kind of specific search, like we just showed, it's showing you the query, so at least you know what was searched for and why it was searched. So if it did something weird, like instead of searching for semaglutide, it searched for Tylenol, you would at least see in the traffic pattern that's what happened. So that kind of auditability, LLM, 2 structured search provides one level. I don't know, Kerry, if you had another thought here.
Yeah, we provide for our code extraction API Construe, that's like a RAG-based approach. It's doing a semantic search on the similarity between the embedded representation of your request text and the vector embeddings for the specific medical coding system. When it gets the result back, it goes through 2 layers of validation checks and then returns the code along with the AI reasoning. And the reason for this is that, like, I started my background in healthcare machine learning, and explainability was a big challenge with LLMs. It's like we forgot the explainability part, but it's super important. And so that's something that we've built into our product, and we're adding support to enable customers to actually control that final layer. For some organizations, let's say you're doing code extraction for a revenue cycle management use case. That's pretty different than if you're doing code extraction for a clinical insights use case from unstructured data. It's important to provide that last layer of rationale back to the end user. The other thing I'll say is, to Reshma's point, with all of the demos that we've showcased here today, really compelling part, I'll give like a big shout out to Medplum. the level of traceability and audit logging is really exceptional. So you can see like specifically what agent, like what entity was making a specific request, and you're getting full traceability across your system, which is really valuable. And then the other thing I'll say is from an LLMs in healthcare perspective, you still want to ensure that you're having some degree of human in the loop. I think of it similarly in terms of severity of action. Even as a developer, I know folks are going fully YOLO mode with Cursor and Claude Code, but even still, you're not going to just ship directly to prod that way. You're always going to have confirmation that you're okay with it before you proceed. And so in the healthcare space, we have to do the same thing. Our perspective and thesis is you really want to build systems that are including like human in the loop in a way that is the most like user friendly. And so, yeah, that's a couple points I wanted to highlight there.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. Human in the loop, advanced observability, and custom workflow to make it easy are 3 ingredients to get this to work. I think we at Medplum, we're obsessed with observability and at every layer, database to all the request patterns to all the change control for a good reason. You can't really get a robust AI workflow without building that trust. And that's really about the reps and doing it, see what came out, correct, reprompt, change the model, whatever. But that's the way to make it happen. What about cross-enterprise or cross-system data normalizations? Lab converted to receiving institution norm ranges and image viewing. Very good question. On the Medplum side, we do see like robust usage of people upload something and then basically use LLMs to ETL it into FHIR. Our major tools to like really normalize across different systems is FHIR has really advanced administrative controls. For example, you can represent your, I know Alex is here on the call, but like plan definitions, activity definitions, reference range. Let me see if I can find an example here. These are all actually like representable in FHIR. And I'll show not tell here. This is Medplum provider application. It's a reference app. And you can see this diagnostic report from another institution. You can trace through these observations. They can have a reference range attached to it. This is data-driven in FHIR. For example, if you had a PDF of a diagnostic report, you imported it, store the PDF, have that original data, then you can parse out and store in FHIR the reference ranges, who performed it. So you have that full traceability. You can audit what happened. We see this all the time. This is a super common use case. And that longitudinal record is desirable for many of these life science use cases, also in care. And that is really the way to make it happen. Tracking who did it, who, what, when, where, what was the reference range. That's really part of what the tooling supports. And storing that original kind of media and stuff like that is really useful. Medplum does support image viewing. You can thumbnail, you can build in all of those pieces. We have derm clinics and other use cases that have a lot of media, even DICOM usage on the platform. So happy to chat about that at length. Okay, we're getting towards the last few minutes, but in conclusion, LLMs can understand FHIR really well, and that is unlocking a lot of possibilities at the crossroads of care, life sciences, payer. Kerry and I have shown a lot of demos, many of which are open source and available for people to use. We support many advanced compliance and security scenarios, custom built for your application, for your enterprise. Please contact us about that if that's of interest. These were the 4 demos shown today. We'd also like to invite this group here. We're going to have an interactive workshop in person in January 2026 at the JPM timeframe. Reach out if you'd like to join and get more hands-on in a longer format, make things work. Even before then is fine too, but wanted to make sure to give folks that opportunity. Any closing thoughts here, Kerry?
No, this is just awesome. When Reshma and I decided to do this webinar and we posted it on LinkedIn, we were candidly like blown away by the level of interest. Generally knew this was a space that was getting a lot more interest, but I think it's very exciting to see life sciences folks leaning in more. It's also really cool to see a number of you not from that space, but are excited and interested to learn. We're really grateful to have all of you here today.
We care a ton about community. Couldn't say it with any more emphasis. We'll be on the line for a few more minutes in case folks have any kind of closing thoughts. Thank you again for coming out today and spending an hour of your precious day with us.
Thanks,
Good times.
Pad.
Thank you all for coming out. Good times. And I'm hopeful that folks are inspired to think about apps that could be built, whether you want someone else to build them, you want to build them yourself, you want to try stuff. Very cool. Anyone in town for JPM? January 26th. Yeah. Yeah, more information on how to use this platform to build apps would be great. There's extensive documentation on how to build apps. We welcome people to book on our calendar anytime. And let's see, if you would like to just chat about it more, have a calendar. Phenomenal APIs, very cool use case. This is also novel to life sciences and healthcare. It's burgeoning industry, but really we're dev tools focused, like developer, builders, or data science, those in the technical disciplines. We're hoping to engage on that front.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.